Hi guys, and welcome to this complex scene urban sketching step-by-step tutorial. And then what I'm going to do here is I'm going to start off by looking at the reference picture. Now the first thing you can do here is break this up into some simple kind of shapes really, where if we look at the horizon, which is really the end of the water, you know, where the land meets the water in this case, it's roughly halfway up the page. But I mean, for the sake of composition, I might move that down a tiny bit. If we look right into the middle of the drawing, you can see there is some perspective lines going roughly into the middle of the drawing. You can use some of those as sort of guidelines generally, but also I think locally there is some variation. If we look at the orientation of some buildings, they are slightly different to others, but it gives us an overall feel for the sort of general perspective of the piece. Right hand side of that building, maybe just up to the left there of that orange umbrella, is where the centre point is going to be. Now I'm not going to do a lot more in terms of discussing construction here, because I'm not constructing this, it's a sketch, so I'm sketching it. So I'm going in pretty cold with a pen. I'm just going to whack it down, but I can talk you through how I do that and talk you through what I'm thinking as I'm going. So here I'm sketching in a pad of Khadi paper, which is handmade paper from India, and it's waste cotton rags that's used to recycle in a way and it becomes this amazing textured paper. It's a really spongy paper, it's very absorbent, which is good in some senses, but in other senses you're better off using smooth paper, but I won't go into that right now. That sort of spongy paper works really well for some media, but not so much for others. But I love it. But I love it for like line and wash and watercolours and urban sketching style stuff. So as you can see here, I'm really concentrating on what's happening at the bottom of the page there. I'm starting on the left hand side, which is what I tend to do because I'm right-handed, and in the same way that if you're writing, you're working from left to right, you won't smear the ink. So what I'm doing is a continuous line method, kind of vaguely. I'll choose an area and I'll start to add in some detail, but you know, I'm not being too specific. If you kind of vaguely follow what I'm doing here in terms of the details, what I'm sort of trying to show, you can see I'm adding in some of those areas on the tower. I'm looking at my lines, you know, my points of perspective, you know. I'm looking at that tower and I'm realizing it's vaguely, how many sides is that? 1, 2, 3, 4. It's vaguely a sort of hexagon. How many sides is that? Anyway, I'm drafting it in. Now, one of the things I really want to stress is, you know, there's accuracy and then there's accuracy. We can break apart a piece of art into a sort of Canaletto version of, you know, Venice, where we have perfect perspective and each window is rendered perfectly, and that's fine. But that's not really what this is. For me, urban sketching is a quick, sort of gestural, it's almost like it's a sketch, you know. It's not supposed to be an accurate architectural drawing. It's a sketch where you get a feel, a very quick feel often for a view or a building, or even, you know, it could be just a vehicle or something like that. So what you're looking to capture is the essence of something. Now, the way that you do that is very much with your language, and you should never dismiss the value of your language when it comes to art, because it is the unique thing about you. It's your superpower. If you imagine there's many things in the world other people can do probably better than you, you know, there might be better tennis players, or, you know, they might be better at maths or whatever, but nobody can do you. That's like your special power. So never underestimate your language and be afraid to develop it by being looser and being messier and just trying to sort of like amp up your character when it comes to your drawing or your painting style. Now, if you don't feel you have a character, or you have a very strong drawing style you're very happy with, you know, you can develop that. And that comes through sort of embracing play and embracing perhaps different ways of working. You know, doing little things like continuous line drawing and stuff like that, I think can be really useful, or blind drawing. But I'm currently about halfway through recording my How to Draw series. And that's going to be a real deep dive into a lot of these kind of concepts, really. So yeah, look out for that. Anyway, back to the drawing. So what I'm doing here is I'm looking at the area just to the right of the tower, and I'm vaguely starting to think about large areas of windows. And what I often do when it comes to sketching large areas of windows on buildings is I'll do a series of vertical lines, and then I'll just do a series of perspective lines. And I think it's like a grid that goes onto the front of the building. And often that can be a nice little sort of visual shortcut, but it's also slightly a style thing. Before you're sketching things like windows, have a think about where those horizontals are going to be going towards. Now, often how I do that is I have in my mind a magic point that everything is roughly aiming to. And as you can see here, I'm putting in some horizontal lines on that building. And if you follow where they go to, they're going to go to roughly the middle of that building in the middle. And that is the vanishing point. Now, with single point perspective, pretty much everything goes to a vanishing point. I've done videos on it. I'll be doing more videos on it. But generally, you'll have, with single point perspective, a point within the picture where most of the horizontal lines will head towards if they're on either plane. This is, as I said before, an urban sketch. So you want to get a feel for those details without being too prescriptive. So a couple of brollies, a couple of sort of carrot shape for people, a few blobs with small blobs on top to represent bodies and heads, is often enough. Now, I've had a look again at this building on the right hand side. I've noticed there's some canopies. Now here they're quite small, but I've made them a little bit bigger just for the sake of breaking up that shape and adding a little bit of variety. And as you can see, this building towards the end, it doesn't actually kind of turn away quite as much in terms of perspective. In the original, it's actually in line with the other building. But just to exaggerate that perspective and give you the feel of a local area, if you know what I mean, I've turned that round a little bit, and I think it looks quite nice like that, so I'll leave it. I always find that just sitting on a harborside or even near a stream, that my body seems to go into some wonderful sort of cathartic state, and I just seem to chill out. So here I'm very much drawing these as I see them. Now, I could talk you through a lot of the rationale here, but to be honest with you, a lot of it is slightly autonomous. I don't actually think too much. It's very basic in the sense of what I'm looking at, shapes. I know that roughly is like a big bath shape with a center console there with a wheel on. And I know I can see that other side of the transom, the back of the boat. And then I'm looking at that engine at the back and going, well, it's vaguely like a square but with rounded corners. But it's really funny with boats, sometimes you can do one or two lines, absolutely nail it, and it sort of somehow captures the essence of it. But other times you can do like 50 lines and it still just doesn't feel right. And it's weird how you never quite know how much detail to put on. Like here I'm drawing a railing on, and you think afterwards, did it need that? They're funny things. I think one of the reasons why they're actually quite challenging, particularly modern glass fibre boats, and this one in the foreground is a real classic example, is because they are quite smooth. There's not a lot of detail, whereas with a more old-fashioned wooden fishing boat where you have like clinker planking, in other words, the planks that make up the construction of the hull, they overlap, and you have bits of wood here and rotten bits there and loads of like rust, and I think that amount of detail actually makes them easier to sketch in a way, because you can focus more on texture when it comes to the watercolour stage. Whereas actually using watercolour on modern plastic boats, it just feels like they feel a bit flat. There's not a lot to go at in a way. It's a little bit like the difference between a modern skyscraper compared to like a thatched cottage. Watercolour on a thatched cottage, you've got loads of interesting textures and colours, whereas a modern skyscraper with glass windows tends to just reflect the sky. Does that make sense? Anyway, so here again the temptation is to go, there is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 boats, I think, but I don't think I'm necessarily doing that. I'm doing it a little bit. I've got 3 in, but then I might just go in and probably knowing me, do some vague boat shapes because the detail is in the foreground, not in the background. So what you're doing here is just putting in some, yeah, there you go, some sort of rough shapes. Now, one of the things I wish I'd done with this picture is taken out that boat in the foreground, the modern boat, and replaced it with one of these more old-fashioned fishing boats. Now, I could have done that really, really easily, but yeah, anyway. So when it comes to sketching in this Harborside here, again, I'm doing some really simple polygons, really simple lines, nothing fancy at all. So I'm looking at the drawing and going, what else is there to do? I could do a bit more in the sky. I'm going to stop, have a think, look at it and go, what else do I need to do? So here I have my Daniel Smith palette. Don't be confused by, oh, it says smink. That's just the tin. It's not the paint. So here I'm going in with the phthalo green, and this is the blue shade. And this actually is one of those colours that I think I originally sort of played with it as a foliage colour, but actually it's a really good kind of base coat for what I would call like a Mediterranean Sea, because it really genuinely looks to me a little bit like water, shallow water, when you see it, you know, on sand. And you can often sort of exaggerate that a little bit by when you put in a light wash of this, you can put in some small horizontal touches while it's wet of a kind of yellow ochre or a raw sienna. I'm using a slightly more brown here. Yeah, I'm mixing that with a bit of a burnt umber, I think, or it might be transparent red oxide. Yeah, transparent red oxide. And that kind of looks a little bit like you're looking through the water to the bottom, you know, of the ground onto the sand. Now this, again, this is a personal thing. It's like a visual shortcut. Some people might look at it and go, "No, that doesn't work," but it's just, I think it looks quite nice. So again, now you could leave that to dry and let that dry, and then go over the top of that to create some sort of wavelets. So that's what I'm doing here. Now, quite controversially for me, I'm actually doing some underpainting here. These are some sort of like vague shadows. Oh, it's a bit rich, that one. I'll dilute that back a bit. So what I'm doing is I'm choosing some areas to make darker and some areas to make lighter. In my head, I have very much the sun coming from the top right hand corner of the page, if that makes sense. So the sun's coming from up here and it's going to go down from right diagonally to the lower left hand side. So this is quite a complex scene, but I don't want to get too fiddly with the painting. But what I've decided to do is very much, instead of going in doing a series of washes and building it up slowly, I wanted to do it in 2 or 3 different layers, but go quite pigment rich. So I'm making sure that every layer has some little dots of detail and a little dot of light. So that top right hand corner there's just a tiny bit of light on that gable end. That's why I've put that spot of orange and that little spot of orange there. I've done a sort of slight bit of green just in the middle there, and I think that helps create a little bit of interest. Often when I do these paintings, even, you know, when I'm doing them for YouTube, is what I'm doing is I'm seeing what works and what doesn't. I'm not in the game of like prescribing to you exactly what I think is the right way of doing things. I think often, you know, people might look at my work and go, "Oh, I don't like that," or "I don't think that works." But that's kind of the point of it, is you can take away from particularly a drawing like this, which is quite complex, and it is quite, in terms of urban sketching, there's quite a lot going on. It's quite busy, and they might go, "Oh, I really like that little orange spot up there. That really works for me. I'm having that." Or they might go, "But this Monte Mite that's going in here, I don't like that." And that's great, because you get to see the whole buffet and choose what you want, you know. So again, in terms of color choice, I'm looking around the picture here and I'm going, what's vaguely that, while I've got this paint out, what's vaguely that color, what's vaguely that color? And I'm thinking a little bit about values in terms of what's in shadow and what's not, as well as, you know, what color I actually want to choose for things. And again, as I said at the beginning when I was talking about the sketching stage, this does not have to represent at all the color that you see in the photo. You can change it completely. But one of the things you will find is that often colour harmony in terms of a shade, it makes a picture feel harmonious. Now I'm going to show you a really good example of that in a bit, of when it doesn't work. I think it doesn't work, but anyway. So often the whole point of this palette here, you see that I'm mixing colours together, is I'm transitioning on the palette from some of the pink that I start with, mixing a bit of the Monte Natural Sienna. Here I'm mixing a little bit of blue in there, or a little bit of Van Dyke brown. So what you're actually doing is developing your palette, your paint on the palette, and then transferring it to the paper. But there is some colour harmony because you're only using effectively maybe 5 colours. You've got some quinacridone rose, quite a lot of yellow ochre. You know, here I'm using some undersea green and a little bit of sap green. But you're not talking about a whole load of different colours. And one of the nice things about working sort of quite wet, like I'm doing here, because I've not dried this yet, is that they do blend together. So at this stage, it feels like, because this isn't the finishing stage where you want nice crisp edges, this is still the kind of the underpainting stage, really, where you don't, if it's a bit messy and things are mixing together, that's fine, because it sort of feels harmonious. Now, I could genuinely here just leave it there. I think actually, to a certain extent, this one was overworked a little bit, and I don't mind admitting that. So actually, I think here, what would be really nice is let that dry, and then just colour in the windows, you know, put a bit of dark in the windows. Oh, and maybe that roof in the middle. And then I think that would have been absolutely lovely there, and have it just left there. But while this is still wet, what I'm doing now is I'm going to go and add in a little bit more shadow. So I'm adding in a little blue there, and I'm just backing those values down a little bit. I think I just want to give a little bit more contrast in some of these shadow areas. All right, so once that's done and I've added those little shadow details in, it's going to go and get its first hairdry. Now, the importance of the hairdry is it means now that whatever details we put in next will have hard edges to them, because they won't go soft and blend in with all the other stuff that's on the paper. So the next stage here is just to add in a little bit of detail on that roof, a little bit of detail up there too. Put it in there now. So the final touches, which I think for me sometimes feels a little bit like I do it because, not because it needs it, it's just because it's such a part of my routine to dot some little highlights on things. I like it. It's just like a signature thing. I'm using the white gel pen, and I'm choosing just a couple of areas to add in a little bit of reflection, maybe on these outboard motors. It doesn't do any harm. I mean, there's not really a lot to do on this one, really, because there isn't a lot of white dots. Now, I could go back in with the Posca pen and add in some more details on the right-hand side, you know, along the key side, and add in just a few dots as if there was a few, you know, little flies buzzing around. And again, on the key side, adding in some details on the brollies just to lift them out a little bit. And I think it's a good example for me of sometimes you get like a win and you get a loss in a picture, if that makes sense. But every picture is an opportunity to learn. I think on the right hand side, the fact that I put 3 layers of shadows in, 4 if you count the one and the bottom, weirdly actually it works really quite beautifully. You have different layers of colours in there, but it doesn't actually feel overpainted. The only thing I would say for this that I don't think worked is the big blue blob in the foreground, and I don't really like the painting on the boats. I think the boats could have been left and we could have just had that band of colour and then the reflection in the water. But the rest of it, yes, it's scruffy, yes, it's a little bit impressionistic, but I do like it. I think with urban sketching, it's really nice to choose simple principles like, you know, perspective or shadows or, you know, selective colouring or whatever, and concentrate on those. But sometimes you just want to do a whole drawing. And then sort of deconstruct it afterwards and think, well, what could have been done differently or whatever. I mean, it's all good fun, isn't it? We're all on a learning journey, and that's the great thing about it. There's always so much to learn. So I hope you guys enjoyed that. And as ever, I really appreciate you watching, supporting, subscribing, liking, blah, 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 blah. And we see you next time. Thanks. Bye-bye.